Okay, so good day. For today, we're going to discuss about array. So after this module, you should have learned to know the to use array no in a program and to create and access array values by number or name. Array is available no, that store set of values like text, numbers, or even special characters. There are three kinds of array. We have index array. It's a type of array that use an index to assign value of an element. Number two is the associative array, no, also known as hash, an array that uses, of course, symbol to indicate the association between a key and its values. Number three is two-dimensional array. Now, it refers to array that contains an array. Okay, so I'll just want to play a video presentation.
In this episode, we're going to talk about something called an array inside PHP. And for this episode, we're just going to really briefly get into a little bit about the arrays and how we actually create them and how we can echo out each individual array or like data inside the array. So for the last episode, when we talked about loops, we really briefly talked about arrays. And this is actually the same array as we used as an example for the last episode when we talked about the for each loop. So we're just going to go ahead and use the same one as an example for this episode. Now, the way we create arrays, or at least the purpose of arrays, is to store a lot of data in a single variable. Now, you could essentially say, well, okay, if we want to store 5 pieces of data, I could create a variable that I can say, I can call it data 1 is equal to, and then I can take, a string like Daniel up here, and I can save it, and then I can copy this one and just create a couple of other ones underneath here. We can actually call this one 2, 3, 4. And then again, we can just change the names in here. But now, doing it this way is going to get quite annoying when you do actually want to, have a lot of data going on at once. So instead of having each of these variables created, we can actually create a very short piece of code which simply does the whole thing for us without having to create all these variables down here. So the basic idea behind arrays is simply to write shorter code and to use these in a little bit, easier way that we can by using a lot of variables. So now that we have an array up here, which by the way is written out by simply writing array, parentheses, and then putting the data in here, separated by a comma. You can use strings, you can use integers, you can do, use a lot of different types of data. Now, if I do actually want to write something out on the screen from this array, we can actually go ahead and say echo the name of our variable, which has the array in it. And then I can actually go ahead and add curly brackets, no, sorry, not curly brackets, just regular brackets. And inside these brackets, we can write from 0 till however many pieces of data we might have inside the array. Remember, we do actually start at 0 when we count. So 0 would be Daniel in this case, 1 would be Jane, and so on and so on and so on. So if I actually echo out array 0, go to my browser, you guys will see we get Daniel. If I say 2, we should probably get Jacob, which in this case, we do. So when we talk about arrays, there's a lot of different things we can do with arrays, and it can actually get really, really, really complicated. You can actually have an empty array and you can start putting data into the array by simply assigning it underneath here. There's really a lot of stuff we can do with arrays, and there's actually a lot of different types of arrays. We have something called associative arrays. We have something called multidimensional arrays. We have a lot of different types of arrays out there. Now for this episode, we're just going to focus on talking about, regular arrays. But in the future, we're going to get into the multidimensional and associative arrays and that sort of thing. For this episode, we're just going to go ahead and end it here, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, so this time, no, we're going to have a custom functions in PHP. The real power of PHP comes from its functions. PHP has more than 1,000 built-in functions, and in addition, you can create your own custom functions. So in a PHP built-in functions, as I mentioned, PHP has over 1,000 built-in functions that can be called directly from within a script to perform a specific task. PHP user-defined functions, no, beside the built-in PHP function, it is possible to create your own functions. No? A function is a block of statement that can be used repeatedly in the program, or a functions will not execute automatically when a page loads. No? A functions will be executed by a call to the functions. And creating a user-defined functions in PHP, no, a user-defined functions declaration start with the word function, no? Then function, then the name, opening close parenthesis, then curly bracket, then the code to be executed, and end. No, we need to understand that function name, of course, with an opening curly bracket indicates the beginning of the function's code, and the closing curly bracket, no, indicates the end of the function. So the function's output, let's say, for example, hello world, to call the function, just write its name followed by the brackets, open and close parentheses. Okay? I just want to play the video presentation.
Today we're going to talk about something called a user-defined function inside PHP, and this is especially an important episode for you to watch because you will be using user-defined functions all the time when you code PHP code. So we talked about predetermined functions, which are functions that has already been made inside PHP, and we can just use it right now. We don't actually have to create it first, but a user-defined function is a function that we create that we can use later on inside our code. So to give you guys an example here, let's actually go ahead and write out a function, just the basic setup for a function, which is by writing function, parentheses, curly brackets, and this is the basic setup for a function. Now, there's a couple of things we need in here. First of all, we actually need to write something inside the curly brackets so we can actually tell the function to do something, and we need to give the function a name. So in our case, we can just go ahead and call this one, new calc with a big C, which is the name of the function. Now, when we call this function, it's going to do whatever is inside our parentheses, not the parentheses, the curly brackets, which are in here. And for our example, we're going to go ahead and tell it that when we call the function, we want it to take a number that the user has defined, or maybe something we defined beforehand, and take 75% of it, and then echo out a string that says, here is 75% of what you wrote, and then it's going to tell us what the actual calculation is. So one thing I want to note out with functions is that it's very important. Well, it's not very important. You can easily, not follow this little rule here. But when you create functions yourself, you need to make sure that one function does one thing. So I've seen people, and I've done it myself in the past, where I have one function that does a whole bunch of, stuff all at once. Like, first of all, I would calculate 75%, echo it out, and then afterwards I would take the 75% and do something else with it, and suddenly I end up with this function that does a whole bunch of stuff, meaning that I can only use it one place inside my website. Now, a function is supposed to be something that you can use multiple times, many different places inside your website, so you avoid having to write the same code over and over again. So that's the whole idea behind functions, is that we don't want to write stuff over again all the time. So one function should do one thing, so it's possible to use the same function over and over again. So inside the curly brackets, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, which is going to be new number, I guess, equal to variable x multiplied by 0.75. which is going to give us 75% of whatever variable x is. Now, variable x, we haven't actually created yet, and we're just going to go ahead and create it right now. So on top of our function, we're going to say variable x is equal to, let's say, 100. So now what we're saying is that we want to take variable x, and when we call this function, then we want to do something with variable x. Now, underneath here, inside the curly brackets, we're going to go ahead and create an echo. That's going to echo out a string, which says here is 75% of what you wrote. Now we're just going to pretend here that the user did actually write what x was equal to. So after the echo, we of course need to include the actual variable we have up here, the new number that we created. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it, paste it after the string with a punctuation between them. And now we have a function that simply takes, x and takes 75% and writes out, here's 75% of what you wrote. Now, we need to do one more thing, because right now, if I were to actually, use this function, it wouldn't actually work. Because we need to make sure we actually call the actual variable we're going to use inside the function. Now, it's important to note, you don't have to use, like data outside the function. So we don't have to use like a variable that's outside the function. We could easily just say that this in here is 100 times 75. And then you can just call the function and it's going to calculate, 75% of 100. Now, because I want to actually use a variable outside the function, we need to make sure inside the parentheses, we write which data we're picking up from the outside of the function. Otherwise, it doesn't know what variable x is. So inside the parentheses, we're going to write variable x. So now it's actually going to go looking for variable x outside the function. So now that we have this, we actually have the function created, but we haven't called the function yet. If I actually go into my browser, refresh, you guys can see we have nothing. And that's because we just created a function. We need to call it as well, just like we would with any other kind of predetermined functions inside PHP. So underneath here, we're just going to go ahead and call out this function. So I'm going to go ahead and say new calc parentheses semicolon. So now, if I actually go to the browser, you guys can see we do actually get a warning here. Okay, yeah, I know why we get the warning. Inside, when we call the function, we also need to make sure we do actually include variable x, because you need to pretend like we're calling this part up here. Because variable x is inside the parentheses, we also need to put it inside our new calc function we actually call down here, because otherwise it doesn't know, when to pick up variable x. Now, the cool thing about functions is that right now I do actually have variable x on top of my written out function here, but you can put variable x any way you want as long as it comes before when you actually call the function down here. Because right now we don't know what variable x is at the moment when we actually create the function, but at some point, much later in the code, when we do actually decide, okay, this is what variable x is, and now I want to call out new calculation, we can just simply write this piece of code down here and get the actual number. So if I save this, refresh, now we don't get an error. And it will actually tell us, 75% of 100 is 75%. So we can always go in and change variable x. And this is the really cool thing about functions, because we have a bunch of code that does something. Let's say I need to calculate something again underneath here, where I want to change, variable x to maybe variable a. I can actually go in and say that variable a is equal to 10. And the new calc, I can then change the variable x inside new calc to variable a. Because now it's going to refer to new calc and say, okay, we have a variable called a inside our parentheses. So it's going to go in and replace variable x in here with variable a, because we did actually decide to do that down here. And now it's going to go looking for variable a up here instead. So if we go ahead and refresh the browser, you guys will see we get, here is 75% of what you wrote, 7.5. So we should probably include like a break in here or something so we can actually see what's going on. So I'm just going to go ahead and echo out a break here. Like so. So now we can actually see the difference here. There we go. So functions is something that we don't, well, it can be a little bit confusing in the beginning. But you just need to know that you can write functions like so at the very top of your document preferably, so you actually have the function before you start calling it. Otherwise you can't actually find the function, but you need to make sure you have the function somewhere where you can call them, and then you can simply write out the functions down here or somewhere else in the website. Now, a typical thing to do is to include a document that has all your functions in it, at least one PHP document with all the functions related to maybe users, and one that's maybe related to, I don't know, calculations. So you can actually go in and have some kind of system with your functions inside your website. So this is the basic idea behind functions, and I could get a lot more deep into this. I think we're going to stick with this for now, since this is all we need to know in order to create something like a login system. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and stick with this, and then later on, when we do actually get to the more complicated stuff, we'll actually get more in depth into functions. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Okay, so this time is how to include files in PHP. The include or required statement takes all the text, code, markup that exists in the specified file and copies it into the file that uses the include statement. Including file is very useful when you want to include the same PHP, HTML, or text on a multiple pages of a website. So the PHP include and required statement, it is possible to insert the content of the one PHP file into another PHP file, no, before the server execute it. So with the include or required statement, so the include and required statement are identical except upon failure. Require will produce a fatal error. No, include will only produce a warning. So if you want the execution to go on and show users the output, even if the include file is missing, use the include statement. Otherwise, in case of framework, CMS, or a complex PHP applications coding, always use the require statement to include a key file to the flow of execution. And this will help avoid compromising your application security and integrity. Just in case one key file in accidental missing. So including file save a lot of work. This means that you can create a standard header, footer, or many file for all your web pages. Then when the header needs to be updated, you can only update the header include file. Okay.
Today we're going to talk about how to include documents inside our PHP code, because in the last episode we talked about functions, and I did actually mention that a really good idea with functions is to put functions related to a certain thing inside a separate document. For example, if you have a document with user-related functions or a document with calculation-related functions, then it's a really good idea to separate them. Now, we didn't actually talk about including documents yet, which is something that is actually pretty important for you to know, because another thing you can do with including documents is also putting your navigation in a separate document. So to give you guys an example, let's actually say we have a website. And as you guys can see, I do actually have some stuff inside my body tag, like a header, which has a very basic navigation in it. I didn't style this at all. We also have a section down here that has a div in it with a paragraph, or like not a paragraph, a H1 tag in here that says hi there. So if I do actually go and show you guys the website, you guys can see we have the header up here with the navigation, and we have the content down here with the text. Now, let's say I have 10 pages on my website and I need to change the navigation at one point. Let's say I screw something up inside my navigation, I need to change it. Now, instead of having to go to every single document and changing every single page that has the navigation in it, we can actually take our first part of our website, which is the top here with the navigation, and put it into a separate document. Now, doing it this way is going to allow for you to go in and change your navigation in one document and not on every single document you have inside your root folder. So this is quite a nice thing to have, because it can be quite annoying to having to change every single time, every single document every single time. So we're just going to go ahead and talk about how to include the documents and how to create this. So inside my front page here, I do actually have some PHP tags at the very top. But what we're going to go ahead and focus on is what part of the website do we want to separate from the main content. Now in this example, I'm going to choose to take the header and copy all the way to the top here, copy it and delete it. Then I'm going to open up a new document, paste everything in here, and now what we need to do is connect this document to the top part of our pages, which in this case is our front page. So the way we do that is by going in and actually saving our document in here. I didn't actually save it yet, so I'm going to save it inside my root folder as header.php. Now you can call it whatever you want. It's a habit to call it header.php, so that's just what I'm going to call it here. Now inside our front page, we need to link to the actual document at the very top here. And we do that using the include tags. So I'm going to go inside my PHP code. I'm going to write include, space, quotes. It can be double quotes or single quotes, doesn't really matter. And semicolon. Now inside here, we need to write the path to our document. So in this case, I didn't put it inside any folders or anything. So it's just going to be header.php. So now, even though I did actually, completely cut out the header from our document here, or like everything from the header and all the way up to the top, I can actually go inside my browser, refresh, and you guys will see we get the exact same thing. But the only difference here is that I could actually have another document here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it in here, and call this one maybe contacts.php. So now I have another page inside my root folder called contact, and I don't have to include a navigation inside this page. I can just go into my header.php because I do actually have the header included into every single page that I have, which is quite nice when you make websites. So doing it this way as well also allows for you to, like I said in the last episode, include separate PHP document that just has functions in it if that's what you want. So if you go into our header here, which is the one that has all the content that will be on every single page inside our website, we can actually go to the very top of our documents, on top of our doc type HTML up here, and we can include some PHP tags. Now, inside these PHP tags are only going to be documents that we just need to make sure loads first before we load the entire website. And in this case, we can actually just go ahead and include our new page that we're going to create right now that might have a function in it called something. So let's just go ahead and create a function like so, put inside some actual PHP tags like so, and we can save it as maybe, let's say, let's create a folder in here that's called functions. So we do actually have a separate folder just for functions, and we can go ahead and call it user-functions.php as an example. So if I go into my header, go to the very top here, I can say, okay, I need to include a document in here. So I'm going to include space, quotes, semicolon, and then I'm going to dig into my folder, because I did actually create a folder called functions, / user-functions.php. So now I actually included my functions inside a separate document, and I have it linked to the very top of my page, meaning that all the functions I create inside my user functions is always going to load first, meaning that I don't have to worry about the function not being loaded before I actually start using it inside my pages. So this is quite nice to be able to do, and it's something that's really important to be able to do because, like I said, we want to be able to do this sort of thing to have some system and order in our websites. Now, another thing I want to talk about is also we have something that's called include once, which is something that you don't necessarily need to do inside a website. But including once means that you're simply including a document one time. And one possible way you might want to use this is inside a loop, for example. Let's say you need to loop something out and you only need to include a function once in the first loop. Then you can make an include once and just loop it out once, and then it's going to stop including this document inside your loop. So we won't really be using include once at all, I think, but I just want to put it out there that it's actually out there, so it's actually possible to use it. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode regarding including documents. It is quite a nice thing to know because you will be using it quite often. I can promise you, if you make websites, even if you're not planning on using PHP code in a website, you will probably still be using at least the include header that we have inside these documents, because it's quite a pain having to change the navigation in multiple places when you can just change it in one place. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, so this time we're going to have a PHP local and global scope. The scope of a variable defines where it's accessible in a program based off of where it was created. Just because we created a variable in one place in our program doesn't mean it's going to be accessible from anywhere in our script. Again, we have two types of variable scope. We have local and global, and their differences actually. To know about what this variable is and how it can be created, you can of course apply of the variables, the global and local. When we say global scope, a global scope contains all the things defined outside of all code blocks. A code block simply consists of group statement inside curly braces. If a statement, loops, functions are example of a structure that created a code block. So a global variable has global scope. So a global variable is accessible from anywhere in the code. On the other hand, local scope or local scope variable contains things defined inside a code blocks. So a local variable has a local scope. So a local variable is only accessible where it's declared. Okay?
Today we're going to talk about something called a global scope and a local scope inside PHP, and this is not really that complicated, so we're just going to make a really short episode of this. Now, as you guys can see, I do actually have some stuff on the screen already. I have a variable called x, which is equal to 5, and have a function that we created called something, which has a variable inside of it called y, which is equal to 10. Now, the whole idea behind global and local scopes is that when we have a function, any kind of variable we define inside the function is going to be a local scope, meaning that we can only use it inside the function itself. Now, any kind of function defined outside the functions, or like any kind of variable defined outside the functions, are going to be inside the global scope, meaning that we can use them, for our code. So if I do actually have an echo down here, and I were to echo out variable x, go to my browser, refresh, you guys will see we get 5. Now, if I were to try and echo out variable y, because it's inside the local scope of the function, we're actually going to get an error message, because right now we cannot figure out where is variable y at. So this is the basic idea behind local and global scopes. There's really not more to it than this, but you just need to remember that if you want to be able to use a variable inside your code, and you want to use it outside a function, you need to make sure it's inside the global scope and not inside the local scope. So I hope you guys enjoyed. The reason we wanted to talk about this in this episode is actually because we're going to talk about something called SuperGlobals in the next episode. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, so this time we have super globals. No? This was introduced during the PHP 4.1.0 and are built in variables that are always available in all scopes. No? So PHP global variables or super variables or super globals. No? Some predefined variables in PHP are super globals, which means that they are always accessible regardless of scope, and you can access them from any function, class, or file without having to do anything special. The PHP super global variables are globals, server, request, post, get, files, yung env, cookie, and session. So I'll just want to play this video presentation.
Today we're going to talk about something called superglobals inside PHP, and basically a superglobal is when we have a variable that has already been created for us inside the PHP code itself. So I do actually have a couple of examples up here. I have 5 examples out of many, because there's actually quite a few out there. But these are the 5 that I want to talk about in order to, actually have us be able to do something with PHP code, like creating a login system. So these are the ones we need to know about in order to do that sort of thing. And these are the ones that we're going to focus on in the next couple of episodes. Now, we're actually getting pretty close to be able to actually create something inside PHP, like I said, a login system. I keep using that as a reference. But we can, for example, create that after the next couple of episodes. So talking about superglobals, we can actually go ahead and take the first one up here for this episode, called globals. Now, the basic idea behind globals is that we can actually go ahead and refer to any kind of variable inside the global scope, no matter where we are inside our document, whether we're inside a, like a global scope or inside a local scope. So as you guys can see, I do actually have a variable here called x, which is equal to 5, which is inside the global scope. And I have a function down here that has a variable inside of it called y, which is equal to 10. And this one is inside the local scope of the function. So let's say I want to call on this variable up here called x inside the function. Now, the typical way we want to do it is to actually go in and, create some kind of variable inside the parentheses, like called x, which would then refer to this variable x up here when we actually call it out. So instead, we can actually go inside the function and say we have a, a globals, with an s behind it, brackets, quotes or single quotes, doesn't really matter. And then you're going to write the name of the actual variable you want to use inside this function. Now, doing it this way would actually, it's not quite the same as putting in the variable up here in the parentheses, because you can actually change the variable inside here when you actually call it out later on. If you go back to the function episode we have in our series here, you can see that we can actually change the name of the variable in here and call out another variable using just a function. Now, using globals like this, you will always refer to the same variable outside the function. So if I were to type the name of the actual variable I want to call on in here, I can actually say x. Because right now, this variable up here is called x. The $sign is just a symbol that means that this is a variable. So the actual variable name is x. So if I go ahead and say, x in here, and if I actually were to echo it out, I can actually do that as well. So I'm going to echo out globals x, and then I'm going to call the function down here. So I'm just going to go ahead and write something, because that's the actual name of the function. Go inside my browser, and you guys will see we get 5. Because right now I'm calling a superglobal called x, which is out here. I haven't actually called it inside the parentheses, and we still get an answer out of it. So this is the way we can use, for example, a superglobal like globals inside our code. And sometimes it can be quite nice to have something like this, but I would not recommend using it all the time, because this is for a different purpose than putting a variable inside the parentheses. You don't use it for the same thing. And like I said, you guys can go back and look at my functions episode to see why you want to use it inside here. But this should only be used in special cases, and you guys might have a reason to actually use it. But don't use it as a substitute over simply calling a variable inside the parentheses. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. In the next one, we're going to talk about something called post and get superglobals. And these are actually really important for you to know if you want to create like a login system or something. Again, I'm using a login system as a reference here, as an example, to tell you guys you can actually start creating this sort of thing once we start learning these sort of things. But you will actually be able to, pretty soon create a login system, even though you might not right now see how it's possible, with all the stuff we've learned so far. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, actually, this one is one of the most important in PHP programming. The use of post and get. SuperGlobal variables are built-in variables that are always available in all scope, as I mentioned. PHP, of course, $_post is a PHP SuperGlobal variable, which is used to collect from data after submitting an HTML form with method equal post. Then $_post is always also widely used to pass variables. The example, of course, of a form with an input field in submit button. So when a user submit the data by clicking on submit, the form data is sent to the file specified in the actions attribute of the form tag. So we need to point to the file itself for processing form data. If you wish to use another PHP file to process form data, replace that with the file name on your choice. Now, then we can use the global variable $_post to collect the value of the input field. On the other hand, SuperGlobal variables $_get is a PHP which is used to collect form data after submitting an HTML form with method get, or the $_get can also collect data sent in the uniform resource location or URL. When a user click on the link test yung $get, the parameter subject and web are sent to the test. Let's say, for example, you have a file that test_get.php, and you can then access their values in test_get.php with a $_get. Okay, so
today we're going to continue talking about superglobals inside PHP, and for this episode we're going to talk about a couple called post and get superglobals. Now, these two superglobals are used for many things inside PHP, and yes, you will be using these quite often when you code PHP code. Now, the basic idea behind post and get superglobals is that you can pass information into the URL and use it on another page. So to give you guys an example, I did actually create a very basic form down here, which you guys should know how to make by now, because you do actually need to be at least a bit capable of doing HTML code inside our PHP lessons here. So as you guys can see, my form is very basic. It has a input inside of it that has a couple informations inside of it. For example, we have a type, which is hidden. We have a name, which is equal to name, and we have a value, which is equal to value. Now I also have a button down here, which is basically just a submit button that does something with this form when I press it. Now, inside my form tag, you guys may see that I put something in here called a method. Now, a method basically tells our submit button what to do with the information. Right now, I set it to get, meaning that it's going to pass it into the URL, and we can see it inside the URL. Now, if I were to set this one as post, it's still going to pass it into the URL, but we can't actually see the information inside the URL. So if I were to go back to my get method and click the button, it should tell us that name is equal to value. Now we could of course write anything in here we wanted to. I'm just going to write name and value so we know what they are. So if I go into my website here and do actually pay attention to the URL up here when I do actually hit the button, because when I press it, it's going to say, the actual URL, question mark, name equal to value. So now that we have this information, we could basically say that name is equal to Daniel instead. Let's actually go ahead and do that. That might make more sense. So I'm going to say name is equal to Daniel when I hit this button, like so. Now we can actually take this information from the URL inside this page or in another page if we want to, and use the information to say, oh, the person who just typed his name in is Daniel. So this is the basic way we use post and get methods, using actual forms like this, to pass information with them. And you will be using these quite often, because if you were to create something like, a login system, you might want to type in your email or username and a password. And you need to be able to, do this in order to actually use login systems. So to show you guys the post method, if I were to say post in here instead, like I said, it's going to be hidden. So if I refresh my browser and actually go back to the previous page, you guys can see when I hit the button, it's not going to tell us anything inside the URL. But just to show you guys that it's still up there, let's actually go ahead and go inside my PHP tags up here and actually echo out. And of course, this code I'm about to write, we're going to talk about the next couple of episodes. For now, just go ahead and follow along on what I'm doing here. You don't actually have to write it out. So I'm going to go ahead and say variable underscore post brackets, and inside the brackets I'm going to write the name of the input. So in this case it's name. So if I do actually echo out the name of the post method we just used inside the URL, you guys will see that we get Daniel, because we're just echoing out the name inside the URL, which we can't see right now, but it's still there because Daniel does actually exist in here. Now again, if I go back again and change this one to a get method again, just to show you guys, refresh. Let's actually go back to the previous one. There we go. If I were to actually hit the button, you can see name is equal to Daniel. And for some reason we get some error mistake here. Okay, yeah, we do also need to change the, the method up here. So it has to be $_get, because we're changing it back to a get now. So when I refresh, we get Daniel, because name is equal to Daniel. So this is the basic way post and get methods work, and you might actually be able to see a purpose behind this, because a lot of the PHP stuff we do in these episodes, you don't really see the purpose behind it when you learn it the first time, but once you do actually get to use it, you might see the reason behind it. Now these are actually some you can actually see the reason behind, hopefully. So with this lesson in mind, we will actually soon be ready to actually start creating some cool stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time.
So this time we're going to have a sessions and cookies in PHP. A cookie is open use to identify a user. So a cookie is a mail or as a small file that the server embeds on the user's computer. Each time the same computer requests a page with a browser, it will send the cookie too. So with PHP, you can both create and retrieve cookie values. So a cookie is created with the set cookie opening close parenthesis functions. No? So another, of course, is the session. No? So later on, a session is a way to store information or variables to be used across multiple pages. Unlike a cookie, the information is not stored on the user computer. So when you work with an application, you open it, do some changes, and then you close it. This is much like a session. Excuse. The computer knows who you are. It knows when you start the application and when you end. But on the internet, there is one problem. The web server does not know who you are and what you do because HTTP address doesn't maintain state. Yes. Session variables solve this problem by storing user information to be used across multiple pages like username, favorite color, and others. So by default, session variables last until the user closes the browser. So session variables hold information about one single user and are available to all pages in one application. So if you need a permanent storage, you may want to store the data in a database.
Today we're going to continue talking about superglobals inside PHP, and for this episode, we're going to talk about something called a cookie and a session. Now, you might have heard the name cookie before. You know, when you go to a website and it says, do you want to accept cookies, yes or no? Now, the basic idea behind cookies and sessions is that you can save information on the user. Now, a cookie saves information on the user side, meaning inside the browser, and a session saves information on the user inside the server side. So, to give you guys an example, let's say I go to a website that has a login system. Now, I'm going to go into the login system, or like into the inputs of the login system. I'm going to type my username and my password, and then I'm going to hit login. Now, once I log in, if I'm actually logged in correctly, we need to be able to save who is actually logged in. Because once I do actually go to another page, suddenly the website doesn't remember anymore who's actually logged in. So we use sessions to make the website remember who we actually are when we are logged in. Now, even though cookies might be the one you're more familiar with, cookies are usually used for saving information that's not as dangerous for other people to know about, because hackers have an easier time going into your cookies rather than sessions. Now, cookies are actually saved on your computer somewhere where hackers can gain access to it, and you don't want that. So when you use cookies, you can use it for something like, let's say you've been to a website that sells clothing and you want, the website to remember what type of clothing this person likes. So next time they come in, you're going to display that clothing as the first thing when they enter the site. Now, that will be okay because that's not something hackers can actually use for something dangerous. Now, like a username and password, on the other hand, is not something you want to give away. So that's why we use sessions for that sort of thing. Now, there's also a difference here because a session ends as soon as you close down your browser. If I actually go up and shut down my, Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser you might be using, the session is going to end. A cookie, on the other hand, has a time limit. I can actually set a cookie for maybe, 30 days, like a month, if I want to. And when they enter, a website again, it's still going to remember the information that we saved inside the cookie. It's not going to forget it unless we tell it to or the time expires. So now that we talked about the differences between a cookie and a session, let's actually try and talk about how to actually make these. So if I want to make a cookie, I can actually write set cookie, parentheses, which is an actual function inside PHP. And inside the parentheses, we can put quite a few parameters. Now, the first one is the one we have to put in there, which is the name of the actual cookie. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and write name. Afterwards, it would make sense to, actually give this cookie a value. So I'm going to go ahead and say, comma, Daniel, inside a string, of course, because right now, if I call out the cookie called name, it's going to write Daniel because that's the value of it. Now, let's say I want this cookie to expire after quite a while. Let's say a day, which is not quite a while, but let's say we want this cookie to expire after a day. We can actually say comma. Then I'm going to use a predetermined function inside PHP called time, parentheses, which basically takes the current time, and then we're going to add a day to it. Now I'm just going to go ahead and write 86,400 milliseconds, which is a day apparently, because I do actually have a calculator next to me here. But this basically takes the current time and adds a day to it. So a day from now, as you actually activate this cookie is going to destroy itself. Now, let's say I want to automatically destroy this cookie. I don't want the user to wait a day. Let's say I have a button inside the website that says destroy all cookies, and then the user can click it. Now, the way you do that is by setting it to any kind of negative. If I were to say negative, let's say 1 millisecond, this would actually destroy the cookie because, it had to be destroyed yesterday, so it's going to destroy it right now. So that's the way we can destroy cookies as well. Now let's say I want to create a session instead, because like I said, cookies not very safe. So in some cases, if we want to create a login system, we might want to save the username and password, or at least, the name of the user inside a session. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and create a session by saying variable underscore session brackets. And I'm going to go ahead and set this one equal to something. Now inside the brackets, we're going to put either single or double quotes. I'm just going to put single quotes. And we're going to give this one a name. Now I could actually write name inside the session. So right now this session is called name. And we're going to set it equal to Daniel, which is a string. Now, because session is equal to name, now let's actually say this is equal to an actual ID of the user Daniel inside the database, which is not something we want a hacker to get their hands on. Now let's say the ID of this person is actually 12. We don't want the hackers to know about this number, but because we're saving it inside a session variable, the hacker won't actually be able to see this. Cookies, on the other hand, they actually will, but not sessions. So right now we're actually saving a session called name and setting it equal to 12. So we can actually create this sort of thing inside, for example, a form. When we do actually type something to log in, we can actually create these sessions and set it equal to, whatever user ID is equal to the username and password they tapped into inside the login field, inside the input field. So we can actually create these, and as long as we actually have the session running inside the website will actually remember who you are as a user when you're logged in. So knowing this, we're also going to have to talk about actual sessions, because we need to have a session going inside a website in order for it to actually remember variables called sessions, like these sort of SuperGlobals down here. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Today we're going to talk about something called a session inside PHP, and a session is a little bit different than a session variable, which we talked about in the last episode. Now, let's pretend for a second that I want to create a session variable, and I want to access this session variable and use it inside my page here. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have a session running inside our page, because otherwise we can't actually gain access to our session variable on every single page inside our website. And an example you guys might want to use this. Let's pretend for a second that we have a website with a login system, and I type in my username and my password, and then I hit login. Now, if I did actually, choose the right username and password, and I want to log in, now in order to actually, make the website remember that we're logged in, we're going to have to save our username or something that our website will remember inside our session. Otherwise, the website can't actually remember that we're logged in. So to give you guys an example, let's actually go ahead and create a session variable inside my document here called index.php. And I do want you guys to bear in mind that I do actually have a navigation in here, and I have another page called contact.php. So if I do actually go in and refresh my browser, you guys can see we just have a navigation in here. I have home and I have contact, and I can click between them if I want to. Now, going back to my front page, I'm going to go down to my body tag, and I'm going to create a session variable. So I'm going to say variable underscore session brackets, and I'm going to set it equal to some kind of string. Now, inside my session brackets, I'm going to call this one username. like so. And it's going to be equal to Danny948A, just because that kind of looks like a username. So now if I do actually go underneath here and echo this thing up here, the actual name of the session, like so, inside my front page, you guys will notice that we get Danny948A. But if I were to go into my contact page now, you guys can see we get nothing. Well, we do actually need to include the echo inside our contact page, of course. So if I go into my contact page, paste it in, we should be able to, spit out our username, but we get an error message instead. And that's because our website doesn't remember our session variable called username. And we need to do that in order to be logged in. So a way to get around this is to actually have a session started that saves our session variable and allows for us to access it on every single page inside our website. So what I'm going to do in order to do that, to actually start up a session, is to go at the very top of my page here and create a short piece of code. I'm going to start up my PHP tags at the very top. And inside the PHP tags, I'm going to say session _ start parentheses. Now that I have these, I will actually have my session variable saved inside my session, which I started at the very top of the page here. So if I go ahead and copy my session variable and paste it on top of my contact page, I should actually be able to remember the actual username. So if I go back to my home page, you guys can see, okay, now we just set it as Danny948A. If I go to my contact page, now it's in there as well. So using the session start function, we can actually start up the session on every single page inside our website, and it will remember our username, which we need in order to be logged in. So just to give you guys a small tip for creating session starts. Now, a typical thing to do would be to split your website into different documents. For example, I might split my entire header inside a document for itself and then link it or maybe include it on top of my pages with an include function that we do actually have inside PHP. And by doing that and then starting up the session inside the header.php, we do actually have a session running on every single page that has a header attached to it inside our website. So we will automatically have a session started on every single page, so you don't have to copy paste it in the pages like I just did here. But I'm lazy in this episode, so I just kind of did that instead. So this is the basic idea behind sessions, and this is actually very important if you want to create something like a login system. Because without a session, you can't actually be logged in, or at least only on the front page, or wherever you actually do log in. So you need to have this for it to remember that you're logged in inside the whole website. Now, just to show you guys, and this is more of a bonus thing, but an example of, being logged in could actually be to create, for example, let's say we have the front page here, and I make a check that says you are logged in. So I can actually go down here and say if, and actually create an if statement. Whoops, that was too many. I can say if is set inside my condition in here. I can say if is set, and we have something called a session username set, like so. Then I wanted to do this down here. Now, also a little tip for you guys, always check for errors first. So I'm gonna say if the username has not been set, then do this. Otherwise, we're going to do something else underneath here. So if the username has not been set inside our session, then echo I'm totally screwing up here. You are not locked in. Now, underneath the if statement, I'm going to say else. And I'm going to say echo you are locked in. So this would actually be an example of if you're actually logged in, you display one type of content inside your website. If you're not logged in, you're going to display another type of content. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, go to my website, refresh, and let's actually make sure we have everything like it should be. Was I not in the right page? There we go. I'm inside my front page now, and it does actually say you are logged in, because we do actually have this one set inside our session. Now, if I were to actually go in and delete my session here, like so, and actually delete my session startup here, like so, refresh the website, it does actually say you are not logged in, because we are in fact not logged in. But now we do actually have a session, set in here again, and it will say you are logged in. So, and again, this was more of a bonus just to show you guys, to give you guys an idea about how the whole logged in thing works. Now, we're actually getting to the point where we can start creating a login system. And we will actually do it after a couple more episodes. We just need to talk about a few more things, such as how to actually use tables to create something like a login system where you type in your username and password. And we also need to talk about how to create an actual user table inside a real database. And that's going to be a very short episode. We're not going to go very in depth in databases in PHP, but I will actually at some point start up a tutorial series on something called SQL and databases, where we will actually talk about how to set up, complicated databases. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys next time.
So I think that's it for today. So next time we're going to have a discussion starting of the, what do you call this one? The discussions of the creating MySQL, no, table and databases in MySQL in our PHP programming. No? So for the meantime, we have a quiz, no, and an activities uh, based on the given discussion earlier, no, because a while ago, no, we covered arrays, no, how to create your own functions, no, how to include documents in PHP, local and global scope, different SuperGlobals in PHP like post and gets, session and cookies, and how to start a session in PHP. So again, as I mentioned earlier, next meeting we're going to have a discussion on how to create MySQL databases for PHP programming. Okay? So enjoy learning and good luck to your quiz and activities.